family. Welcome back to the Explore the Extraordinary podcast. My name is Betty, and today I'm joined by Eric. And Eric is a near-death experiencer. He's an intuitive astrologer, relationship coach, all things spiritual. We're going to talk about some really cool experiences and the after effects. And I'm really grateful for your willingness to come and serve our community at IANDS, Eric. I'm going to toss it right over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Betty. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to be here. And I'm looking forward to presenting at IAMS Labor Day weekend, August 30th as well. So for me, it was during COVID. I am a native New Yorker, married with 4 sons. We moved to Scottsdale, Arizona around June of 2000 and sorry, just trying to click this thing. Hold on, forgive me 1 second. So we moved to Scottsdale, Arizona around June 30th of 2011. Lived here, enjoyed it. I'm a diehard New Yorker, but I was not familiar with, in the Western Hemisphere of the United States, there's this fungus that you can get from under the ground called valley fever. I got it. My immune system was a little weaker after a couple of surgeries. And then my healing journey began. And I got sicker and sicker, was misdiagnosed, supposed to go to your lungs. It went to my head and my neck. I was producing mucus every day as if I had the flu and got no help at all. And finally got to a naturopathic doctor through my acupuncturist, and then started to get some diflucanazole, did God's first medicine, leeches, and garlic IVs, and really just like wiped out my savings because it was all out of pocket, no insurance. So the pandemic hits, and I was taking care of my mother, who was a survivor of breast and brain cancer. She was a teacher in Harlem, 5th grade, over 35 years, and just an amazing woman, just a true survivor. And she was in a wheelchair. So the pandemic came, my house was on lockdown, wear masks, wear this, that. So about a year and a half in August of 2021, my twins wanted to have a little birthday party. And unfortunately, that was what introduced the COVID big time. We had gotten it in 2020, January, when they said it wasn't here yet, but it was already here, and we had gotten it. And the kids were fine. My wife and I were sick for about 3 weeks, and it just sucked. It wasn't fun. But in August of 2021, Delta came through our home, and Delta was a whole nother monster. So basically, August 27th, my mother's oxygen went to about 88, and that's when they tell you should go to the ER. So we were just right on it right away. We called, boom, they came. They wouldn't come in the home. It was like, oh, toxic. So, we had to take her outside in the wheelchair, and she went to the hospital. Now, the whole time, to show you how the COVID fog really was, my wife, we had the oxygen meter. She was between 92, 93, her oxygen. I'm checking mine, it was like 80, 78. But for some reason, we literally thought like something was wrong with it. August 29th, I'm feeling terrible. And I checked the oxygen, and it was like at 60, 58. We called ER, they come. They're like, Mr. Taylor, how are you standing? Your oxygen is 56%. And I'm like, I don't know. I was like, strong like bull. I'm thinking about like Ben Stiller, right? I was like, I don't know. I'm just being me. I felt terrible. And they put me in the EMS truck. As they're getting ready to close the doors, my boys, it's like a total movie scene, Betty. Like my boys are like crying. I have 4 sons, but 3 at home. And at the time they were, I think, 12 and 8, and 8-year-old twins. And they were just crying. I said, and my wife was upset. And I said, no, don't cry. Mind you, this is August 29th. I said, Daddy's going to be okay. I'll see you in October. And my wife was like, no, like what? And then they close the doors. They take me to the hospital, and then the journey begins. In the hospital, COVID was pretty controversial, unfortunately, and a lot of families divided, a lot of things. The ER doctor verbally assaulted me. She's screaming, foaming at the mouth, yelling at me because I wasn't vaccinated. that was my choice, my own, health. And I have I had the valley fever, and I also have retinitis pigmentosa, an eye disease that makes me legally blind in my right eye. So I told them, that, and she's like yelling. I mean, it was so unprofessional. I couldn't even fathom. They checked me in each day while I was there. I'm getting sicker and sicker. But the first day, they did wheel me down to go see my mother. I give her a kiss. She's actually doing okay. She's like barely like on a little bit of oxygen. She wasn't ventilated. She was doing good. She's kind of looking at me because she was kind of nonverbal and whispering at the time. And I just gave her a kiss and I said, Mom, we're going to be okay. You're going to be all right. And then each day after that, I would just see her through the nurse on over the iPad in the hospital. My wife wasn't allowed to come see me. They had her come to see my mother because my mother was so nonverbal. She kind of whispered with the dementia getting worse. And then she snuck down to come see me. Oh my God, you would have thought like she had a bomb on her back. They were like getting ready to arrest her, but she wanted to come check on me because, they weren't giving her any updates, and I just wasn't getting the best care. Needless to say, I was putting on, they had a mask that they had me put on and would go over your head and everything. And they're like, Mr. Taylor, you should do this. This is your only way to get out of here and you'll be fine. They denied me of the monoclonal antibodies. And by the way, I didn't mention, because of the valley fever, you can't really have steroids. And I explained it to them as soon as I got there that, steroids don't play well. It activates the valley fever. They were more concerned about their protocols. They gave me the steroids anyway. September 6th, I fell into a coma. Now, mind you, they denied me the monoclonal antibodies. They were watching me getting sicker and sicker. I didn't find out till later on, but I was at only 10% of my lung functioning. And I was not doing good and got worse and worse. And they weren't even updating my wife or saying, hey, maybe we should induce a coma so you can rest. I found out they did that to my roommate who I had at the second hospital later on. That happened to him, not for me. Well, I fall into a coma. My wife and I had no idea. My wife gets a call literally 11 on September 6th, a few days before my birthday, and I was 50 years old, getting ready to turn 51. So they shouldn't have denied me because I know my neighbor was 87 years old and he got the monoclonal antibodies. They give my wife a call. Mrs. Taylor, your husband's organs are failing. Death is imminent. We'll call you back in an hour. Click. Now, this wasn't even the heart of pandemic. The hospital wasn't even jam-packed. The fact that they gave her that phone call like that was terrible. My poor wife, I could only imagine, and it was just so disrespectful. They call her back. They tell her I'm intubated. I'm in the ER. Now, she couldn't get to see me till September 20th. So I'm in a coma land. It's like I just teleported. I literally went to another world, never saw a moment of darkness. It wasn't the happy, like walking into the light, Carolad, and seeing Jesus, none of that. I went through the dark night of soul, and I was literally, seemed like every moment or every day battling Satan. I went through a lot of spiritual tests. I saw things of the future, like on the computer, the apps were floating outside of the computer screen, and then you would just tap them. It was like, for me, mini movie vignettes. And each time, it's like I would go on these different adventures. There were a few positive experiences, most of them negative. One positive, or I'll give you two that were kind of funny. My wife and kids, because they couldn't come see me, they would just do FaceTime. So one time they were playing music, and I'm an MC for New York. I love hip hop, part of that generation. And she was playing like Boogie Down Productions and De La Soul and A Tribe Called Quest. And they said I was literally like totally limp out in a coma. I'm like bobbing my head and dancing. And they were like happy, excited. Daddy's moving. The doctor was like, no, 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 stop, stop, stop. The nurse, or I'm sorry, the nurse, no, stop, stop. And they're like, what? They were like, no, no, Mrs. Taylor, it's okay. She was like, did I hurt him? And they were like, no, no, it's okay. We know that he's alive and in there. That's good. But his blood pressure was getting too high because they said I was really bopping and dancing pretty good. So that made them feel like, okay, he's in there somewhere. But those were far and few between. Most of the time I was totally limp and out, and she couldn't come to September 20th. But on my birthday, a few days later, they played, I guess my wife and one of my good buddies, they did a recording of all my friends and family wishing me happy birthday. But what was so fascinating, Betty, I'm getting, they're playing that, but in a coma land, I had, must have been the dream birthday that I always wanted. It was literally a black tie affair. I'm in like a tux. I go into this big ballroom, and every aspect of my life, from kindergarten on through college to work, when I was doing I was a professional actor, television, film, theater, like all walks of life. Everybody was there, like pointing at people and smiling, celebrating. But you know, that wasn't the case. I was being tormented, and unfortunately, during the coma, my wife was, now not in real life, just in a coma land. My wife was cheating on me, having an affair. I felt like she was trying to kill me. She had two boyfriends. I mean, and what was really tough is that they were actually physically abusing her. I was going through these spiritual tests, and in a coma, I died 3 times. After the first time I died and I came back, I realized we don't die. Life is eternal. And it was just kind of weird because most of the vignettes and scenes that I was experiencing were in the hospital. So much so, and my wife in real life on the other side, the hospital was right by the house, so she was doing 2-a-days. She would come in the morning, and then the kids were homeschooling, and then she'd come back in the evening. And I was there until October 10th. So as I go through these different spiritual tests, one of the major things that happened was the second time I died. I was shot. This is in a coma, and it was like outside of my garage in my home. And I literally could feel the heat and the warmth of the bullets in my chest. But when I died, I basically astral traveled to my home. And I had the opportunity to see my 12-year-old at the time 5 years in the future. And I didn't want to do that in like this room. So then I just went to my sofa, but it was like I was experiencing this tour guide of like my wife's boyfriend who was like this complete demon. And he's sitting there. And when I'm sitting on the sofa in my home, my wife was there with a friend slash business associate. She was like dissolving a business and getting ready to start another. So they were there. And then one of my twin sons, he's a spiritual guy, he comes up to me on the sofa, gives me a hug. And what's so wild about it, Betty, it's like he was in 4K technology, and my wife and our friend, they were both, the two women, they were both in 90s VHS technology. It was so bizarre. And so my son, he comes and gives me a hug, and then he kind of like walks off. But then I'm sitting there like trying to get my wife's attention, and her and our friend, neither one of them could hear me. But what was bizarre, like she disappeared, and it was just my wife and her boyfriend. And then they couldn't hear me, but it was almost like he could talk to me and I could talk to him. And it was just so discouraging. And I was like angry and frustrated and depressed. And I just kept going through these spiritual tests. And a big one was everyone basically in the hospital, at least 30 to 40 people were in my hospital room. And the respiratory nurse took away my oxygen because they were just going to watch me die. And I'm sitting there like trying to get my breath. And I got my breath together and I said, if you don't give me back my oxygen and let me die, my family's going to come after you. And then I was getting real, like, indignant. I was like, you have no idea who I am. I am a spiritual giant. And if you kill me, I will haunt and come after each one of you for the rest of your lives. And I told them that. And then I'm like, and it's weird because it was like, I kind of knew some of the people's names and I'm pointing at them and like calling them out. And it was like, it was intense. So I was kind of proud of myself. But I think for me, honestly, if I look at it, I was really overcoming fears. Now, I've never been afraid of dying. My fear was been more about how I would die or leaving my loved ones behind. My father was murdered when I was 6 years old, and my mother was also shot and left for dead and survived when I was 7. So before the age of 8, both my parents were shot. Then at the age of 9, they told me by the age of 21 that I would be completely blind. And that's not the case. I still have my vision today, 53 years old. So thank God for that. But the whole experience was wild. It was a time I was going to Mars. and all these different spiritual tests. But I think the hardest thing was to see my wife cheating on me and just feeling like, oh my God, my family is just gone. And I would keep having these visions where I was at the hospital, then I'd be at the house and back and forth. But, you know, what was really fascinating is that after each time I died, and I died 3 times in a coma, this is all in the spiritual realm, but I was in different dimensions. And there was one opportunity where one, I was going to London with the sun. Another time we were going to Mars. And I was in California getting on a spaceship. And I never got there, but I just remembered, that experience. But the last major thing, that really happened is that I was being tortured and I was trapped in like this dungeon in Phoenix, and this beautiful Latina woman had stole my wallet and she was like going through it, like trying to use my credit card or something. And I'm like these fire torches, and I was like not tied down, but I was sitting on this seat, and there was like a white light underneath me, but I couldn't move. I was stuck. And I just I guess I just knew in my heart and my soul, I just started praying, and I said, God, Jesus, mom, my wife, and said all my 4 sons' names. And I was like, God, Jesus, mom, my wife. And I kept repeating and repeating it. And then it was just like I was freed. But what happened was I got transferred. And before I got transferred, they told my wife, well, your husband's going to start to move, and his eyes will flicker and he'll start to awaken, because they started to strip the medicine away. And they did that, nothing happened. And then they waited a few days. They got kind of concerned. They did a CAT scan of my brain, and everything seemed like I was okay. And on my side, I told my wife, I was like, yeah, I was down there battling Satan. Like, how am I, I'm not gonna wake up. But then they took away all the medicine a few days later, and they were like, "Oh, Mrs. Taylor, he's going to wake up. He's not sedated at all anymore." Crickets. I was just completely limp, nothing. And then they were like, "We better do an MRI and make sure that his brain is really functioning," because they even started to get scared. So this must have been early October at this point, and the results came back fine. I just was still doing what I had to do. I was down there dealing with the spiritual warfare, and I got transferred to. I was in Scottsdale, and I got transferred to Phoenix to St. Joseph's Hospital, which ironically was the name of my stepfather. But I went to St. Joseph's Hospital, and when I was there, the first nurse had said that, you know, this guy, I don't think he's going to make it. Now, I saw her later on when I was awakened. But when I got there, I was totally out. But she saw me like weeks later, and she was like, "Are you Eric Taylor?" She goes by my hospital room and peeps in. She's like, "Are you Eric Taylor?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Oh my God, it's so good to see you." And I'm like, "It's so good to be seen," you know. And she was like, "I was the nurse the night that you came in on the 10th of October. You were not here." She goes, "I prayed for you. I didn't think you were going to survive." She's like, "I'm so glad to see you." She started to tear up and made me tear up. But, the whole experience was really, it was tough, because I never gave up on my family and my wife and my love. And I even told her in a coma, I said, because she was going to move to Atlanta. My now 15-year-old is an actor, and she was going to take him and then leave me with my twins and come back and visit me. I was like in a wheelchair. This is all in a coma. And she was like, "Oh, I'll come back and visit you every 2 weeks until you get better." I just said to her, like, "Why are you breaking up our family? Why are you doing this?" And I said, "I'm going to be here, and I love you, and I know we're going to come back together." And I just wouldn't give up. And I kind of feel like Satan or the devil or whoever was testing me to see if I would give up or I would quit. And I went through spiritual tests. They wanted me to do something. This was like the last test that, wasn't authentically me. They wanted me to cut off all my hair or half my hair, dye my locks like rainbow colors, and be the leader of a gay pride parade. Now, I am not homophobic. I have no issues with anybody, but I'm I'm married with kids and I'm heterosexual. I'm not gay. So I said, no, thank you. I just was like, I can't do that because that's not who I am. And, going through these different tests and these different experiences, and there's so much more. I could, talk for hours about it, but, I realized that we, our soul continues on when we die. And for me, I could say God and Jesus, who, I call Yeshua by his real name, is real. And the different dimensions in the spiritual realm are real because the respiratory nurse and the manager of the hospital that I saw in a coma in real life when I awakened, I saw them in the hospital. And I think the only way to explain that, where I'm coming to realize this now, is that my soul was out of my body, remote viewing back at myself, that I was able to see people in a coma when I was never awakened in the hospital, and then recognize them once I was awakened in real life. That respiratory doctor or nurse, I go respiratory doctor, excuse me, she was never actually they rotate the respiratory doctors, and she worked with my neighbor. But she would come in, and I remember one morning, and it was up, and she came in, and I'm looking at her, and I'm like, I know her. I've seen her before. And then full circle moments, the same thing happened with the manager of the hospital. But even him, they had me on a tube feed. It was either Jevity or A plus, and they're just crap. And they didn't want my wife to give me Kate Farms, which is what we had my mom on, and that's organic and vegan with brown rice. And my blood sugar levels, my blood pressure was off the hook. My blood sugar levels were off the charts. I was on the verge of, like, I guess I would have become a diabetic. But my wife made the nurse, she's like, you have to put him on this. And we were providing it, and they still wanted to deny us. So the nurse actually got in trouble when she switched it. And then that same manager of the hospital, one day he comes into my room, and he was almost startled, my wife said, because I guess he didn't know she was going to be there. It's during the day. And she's like, oh, hi. And he's like, oh, you're the wife that's advocating and fighting for your husband. She goes, yes, I am. She goes, oh, good that, he has you, and da 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 da. But I mean, just so many negative experiences. They snuck me medicine, antidepressant medicine. They're like, oh, and I said, what are you giving me that for? I'm not depressed. They're like, oh, it helps you with your sleep. And I said, that's what the melatonin's for. And then I told them, don't give it to me. And then, because of my poor vision, I have supersonic hearing. I heard them one night, they snuck it to me, and I could hear them outside of the hallway. So the next morning, this Eastern European doctor, I told him, I said, listen, you guys got to stop this. I don't want that medicine ever again. And then they were taking my blood 13 days in a row at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'd almost doze off, and at 3:20, they come to check my vitals. I'm like, you guys got to stop. Because then the doctor comes in 6 a.m. every morning. Mr. Taylor, how are you doing? And I'm like, crappy, because you're taking my blood every day, and I can't get any sleep in here to heal. So it was, everything seemed like a war and a battle. But at the same time, I made it. And once I awakened, now this is wild because I didn't wake up till October 16th. I was in a coma for 40 days. Excuse me. 40 days in a coma, which was obviously a very, is, oh, excuse me, is a very spiritual number. But what was fascinating is that I got there October 10th, but I think I had awakened in the night twice. The first time, I believe, was October 13th. I just saw the light in the hallway, and you're waking up. I'm extremely weak, and I had my locks at the time, but my sweat on my brow. I'm trying to wipe it. They thought I was trying to pull out my vent. I couldn't talk. They weren't looking at me. I guess the trach was in. I was off the vent at this time, but with a breathing tube, and they put restraints on me. Oh, Betty, it was so terrible. And I was so angry and frustrated. And I just went back to a coma land and went back to sleep. It must have been 2 days later. I think it was the 15th. I awakened again, but it was at night. And my wife could only be there, and this hospital was like 50 minutes from my home. And, visiting hours are at 7 or 8. And so at night, I woke up again, and they restrained me again. And then I woke up for good on October 16th that morning. The nurse comes in, and she's like, "Oh my God, what are you doing? She's like, who put these restraints on you? Let me take those off of you." She was like an angel. I was like, "Ah," like she came in and I was just like, "Thank you, God." And she took the restraints off me, and she was like, "Are you okay?" And she was talking to me. And then eventually my wife came. And what was so funny about that, I tried to talk over the breathing tube, and as soon as my wife comes in, she's so excited to see me. But I was angry because she had just been trying to kill me and cheating on me. And she's looking at me and she's like, "What's wrong?" I literally started to speak over the thing. She's like, "No, don't, you're gonna hurt your voice." And I was like, "You were trying to kill me." And she's like, "No, I wasn't." And then and I'm so upset and I'm angry because the last vision that I had while I was out in a coma, she had her laptop in the hospital and she was showing me on the computer our lives together. And then she showed me her future life with her new boyfriend. And then so then when I see her and I awaken out of a coma at the 40 days, I'm like, I'm like, "Are you kidding me? You don't love me?" Like I just, and honestly, it took me a while to realize that what I experienced in a coma was not real. It wasn't real at all. My wife was, oh my God, the best and fighting for me and advocating and keeping me alive. But I did say another thing over the breathing tube. I said, "Who was at the house while I was in a coma?" And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "I came to the house. Who was there?" And she's like, "Oh, our friend with the kids, they were in the pool." And I said, I don't want to say her name, but I said, "Oh, was so and so there?" And she was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, she did come over. We were talking some business we were talking about the business and different things like that." And I said, "I know. I was at the house and I saw you guys." And she was like, "What?" So it was a confirmation for me, but then for her, my young son, Jackson, he said to her, "Daddy came to the house and he's going to be okay." So he saw me in a coma and I saw him when I astral traveled to the home. And then once I awakened in real life, I got the confirmation that actually happened. So, Betty, I went through it. And
Wow. Thank you for sharing your experience, Eric. That is definitely very unique. I don't think I've ever heard anything like that before. I'm so grateful for your willingness to articulate yourself and how amazing that you were able to bring that information back with you. You hear so many people have experiences like this and they don't remember anything. And this is really vivid imagery. So I really appreciate you and your story. I want to shift gears and I want to talk a little bit about what it is that you do with your life now to serve humanity in this spiritual way. If you want to talk about your coaching business or your intuitive astrology business, I'd love to hear about that.
yeah, well, I have been an astrologer since about 2018. I was studying for years after getting sick from the valley fever, and I've always loved astrology. Growing up, I knew, my mom was a Taurus, my dad was an Aries, I'm a Virgo, my sister is a Libra. So I knew that, and then, through my valley fever sickness, I got back into it. Um, Astrology is really the map of your life, a birth chart reading. And what I've come to realize, and even through being in a coma and my experience, it's a remembrance of your soul. So when I bring up your birth chart, every time I still get goosebumps and chills. And I was always gifted in the sense that I would work with clients and I could see their chart and dream about it at night because I have the planet Uranus in the 12th house in my natal birth chart. And that's the spiritual awakener. It can give you very vivid dreams, and you could also have a tough time sleeping at night. But I would always visualize my clients' charts. But now, after 40 days in a coma and 85 days in the hospital, A lot of gifts have increased. So I mentioned because of my vision, my hearing, that now has gotten to a point where I can hear like the binary code, like the 0011. So I unplug the internet at night, the EMF, like I can hear like the numbers, like it's really bizarre. And even when airplanes or helicopters fly over the house, it's like so loud. I feel like they're on my roof and they're nowhere near, but my hearing has really increased. But what's really fascinating, and I do, a natal birth chart, I do relationships, career, I do business birth charts, whatever anyone needs. But what I've found that now I get these intuitive downloads, and this is not just when I was dreaming. Now this happens when I'm preparing the chart for the client, or sometimes even live when I'm reading. So I may see like, oh, Betty's got a Libra moon in the fifth house or something, right? And I'll just be looking and interpreting it for you. But now I get these like blasts, these flashes, these quick downloads of your actual astrological placements of how it, the definition of it, how it plays out in your personal life in real life. So like I'll see you doing something that's like, oh, this is how Betty does her creativity. The fifth house is creativity. And I'll see this or see you playing guitar or flute. Like, so I get these visions while I'm working with my clients. So it's super powerful. And um, I've experienced a lot more as well. And now I've been seeing a ton of UFOs and things like that. And I've seen a few before, but since I've awakened, I see UFOs all the time, which is really fascinating because, some people don't know or question what's real. Is God real? Or aliens real? This and that. Well, for me, I don't have any questions about the dimensions and spiritual realms and God and extraterrestrials. I know that they're real because I've seen it in different realms or worlds or dimensions. And, what's really wild too is my connection to nature. When I'm grounding and earthing and communicating with the trees and the birds and my ancestors, which on September 21st, while I was still in a coma, my mother, she passed away and died. And, thankfully, my wife waited a little bit after I awakened in October to share that news with me. But I communicate with her all the time as well. And so I just stay in gratitude, Betty, and for me, serving my clients and being of service to humanity. And I've come to realize with, you know, different Akashic Records readings with Devi Solaris and different people that the reason why I learned astrology so quickly was that I helped form the zodiacs and the constellations from Vega and Lyra, and that I've been working on astrology for millennium. And even here in ancient Kemet and Atlantis and things like that. So I love what I do, but it is truly a calling. And I just love helping the collective, especially during this time as we're going through this ascension and awakening into the fifth dimension.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I've really enjoyed this conversation so much, Eric. And like Eric shared, he's going to be presenting at the IANDS conference this year, which is 2024, in case you're watching this sometime in the far future. And we're going to be in Phoenix, Arizona. And the information for the conference is in the liner notes of this episode, along with all of Eric's information on how to connect with him. Just want to see if there's anything else that you'd like to share to feel more complete about our time together today.
Well, for me, I want people to know there's nothing to fear. Fear is such a low vibration and frequency, and unfortunately, some of the powers that be want to keep us in fear. But you have to have faith over fear. And I always say hashtag deep water faith. So fear nothing. But what's important, especially at this time, we have Saturn in Pisces until 2026 February, and Saturn and Neptune will dance together in a conjunction in Aries in February 2026. And we're going through a lot of tough times now, and we're going to experience more tough times. but you have to focus on your heart chakra and spiritual discipline. We have to, whatever you can do, meditating, toning, grounding, earthing, um, guided meditations, whatever you can find, mindfulness, hiking, walking in nature, but take 15 to 30 minutes a day. Do something, try your best, because when you do that, you are literally elevating your spirit and your soul, and you're really protecting yourself from the dark entities and negative energies on this planet. So that's my hope for the collective. And I want people to know, yes, everything seems bizarre and crazy right now, but with us being, Pluto Aquarius coming up in the next 20 years and the age of Aquarius, this is just the shift from the Piscean age of illusion and deception to the age of the awakening and truth. And the three highest frequencies for the age of Aquarius are truly love, gratitude, and being your true authentic self. So, Betty, that's my message for the collective. And
Very well said.
people can just email me or reach me, biggieastrology.com or biggieastrology@gmail.com. I'm here to be of service and help the collective. So
Thanks so much for your willingness to serve our community, Eric. We'll see you next time.
thank you.